A struggling single father inherits a broken, abandoned farmhouse that no one wanted, worth almost nothing. But when he steps inside and uncovers a hidden secret behind its walls, everything changes. What he finds will not only transform his life, but reveal a truth no one else was willing to see. Subscribe for more powerful stories, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Ethan Carter sat quietly in a dimly lit law office in rural Kentucky, his 2 children pressed close against him as if they could sense the weight of the moment. At 38, life had already stripped him down to the bare essentials. No steady job, no home, just a worn-out pickup truck where he and his kids had been sleeping for weeks. His clothes were faded, his boots cracked, but his eyes held something unbreakable: responsibility. Across the room, his siblings, Jason and Victoria, barely concealed their amusement as the lawyer read their late father's will. They had built comfortable lives, far removed from struggle, and today, they expected rewards to match. Ethan expected nothing. He never had. Then came his name. Instead of money or assets, he was given a forgotten farmhouse, abandoned, condemned, and worth almost nothing. A property no one wanted, bought years ago for just $9. The room filled with quiet laughter, sharp and dismissive. But Ethan didn't laugh. He stared at the old rusted key placed in front of him, feeling its unexpected weight in his palm. Something about it felt intentional. Like a test. Like a door waiting to be opened, not just to a house, but to something far greater than anyone in that room could possibly imagine. The drive to Ashford County took nearly 3 hours, but to Ethan Carter, it felt like crossing an invisible line between who he had been and who he might become. The highway slowly dissolved into narrow country roads, then into long stretches of gravel paths that seemed forgotten by time itself. His daughter, Ava, sat quietly in the back seat, clutching a worn paperback book, while his young son, Caleb, slept against the window, his small breath fogging the glass with each exhale. Ethan drove in silence, his mind racing through numbers that never added up: gas, food, survival. He had less than $300 left, no job waiting, no safety net. And yet, somehow, he kept driving toward a place everyone else had already dismissed as worthless. The GPS signal flickered as he turned onto a barely visible dirt road. Rusted fences leaned into the earth on both sides, swallowed by overgrown weeds. Then he saw it. The farmhouse. It stood in the distance like a ghost refusing to disappear, 2 stories of peeling white paint, a sagging porch, windows shattered or boarded up, and part of the roof caved in as if the sky itself had tried to crush it. It wasn't just abandoned. It looked defeated. Ethan pulled the truck to a stop. For a long moment, no one spoke. "Is that it?" Ava finally asked, her voice hesitant. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah. That's ours." Caleb stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. "It looks broken." Ethan stepped out of the truck, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. He stared at the structure, taking it in, not just the damage, but the bones beneath it. Years of hardship had taught him something most people never learned. Sometimes, what looked ruined was just waiting for the right hands. "It is broken," he said quietly. "But broken doesn't mean finished." He walked toward the house, each step heavier than the last. The air smelled of damp wood and earth, like the place had been holding its breath for decades. He circled the property first, instinctively assessing it the way he used to when helping his father years ago. The foundation, stone, old but solid. The left side, weathered, but still standing strong. The porch, dangerous looking, but repairable. The right side. Fire damage. Serious. But not total. Ethan exhaled slowly. This wasn't hopeless. It was work. Back at the truck, Ava and Caleb watched him, waiting for his verdict, not just about the house, but about their future. "Well?" Ava asked. Ethan looked at them, then back at the house. "We're staying." Those 2 words changed everything. He grabbed the rusted chain wrapped around the front door. It snapped with less resistance than he expected, as if even the lock had given up holding anything back. The old iron key turned slowly in the door, grinding against years of neglect before finally clicking open with a deep, echoing sound. The door creaked as he pushed it inward. Darkness greeted them. Ethan hesitated at the threshold, his children standing close behind him. This wasn't just a house, it was a risk. A gamble. Maybe even a mistake. But it was also the only chance they had. He stepped inside. Dust filled the air, dancing in the thin beams of light that slipped through cracks in the boarded windows. The floor groaned beneath his weight, but it held. The walls were worn, peeling, scarred by time, but still standing. Ava grabbed his arm. Are we really going to live here? Ethan looked around slowly, imagining what it could be instead of what it was. Yeah, he said, his voice steady now. We are. That night, they slept on the floor of a house the world had given up on. But for Ethan Carter, something had shifted. For the first time in weeks. He didn't feel lost. He felt like he had found something. Not just a place. But a beginning. The first week inside the farmhouse was nothing short of survival. Ethan Carter barely slept. Every creak of the house echoed like a warning. Every gust of wind felt like it might tear the structure apart. But he kept moving, cleaning, clearing, making space for his children to feel even a small sense of safety. Dust, broken wood, shattered glass. It all had to go. Ava helped where she could, carefully stacking anything that looked reusable. Caleb turned everything into an adventure, proudly holding a flashlight like he was guarding a castle instead of standing in a collapsing living room. By the second week, something shifted. The house didn't feel as hostile anymore. It felt quiet. That morning, Ethan stood in what used to be the main living room, running his hand slowly across the wall beside the old brick fireplace. He had started inspecting everything more closely now, checking for weak spots, water damage, anything that could collapse without warning. That's when he felt it. Not a crack. Not damage. Something else. A line. Perfectly straight. His hand froze. He leaned closer, brushing away dust with his sleeve. There it was, a faint vertical seam running from about knee-height all the way up past his shoulder. Too clean. Too deliberate to be natural. Dad? Ava's voice came from behind him. Hold on, he murmured, eyes narrowing. He pressed his palm against the wall. It gave. Not much, but enough. Ethan stepped back slowly, his heartbeat beginning to rise. Walls weren't supposed to move like that. Not unless someone had built something behind it. Caleb, he said, keeping his voice calm, grab me that hammer from the tool pile. Ava stepped closer, curiosity replacing the exhaustion in her eyes. What is it? I don't know yet, Ethan admitted. But someone didn't want it to be found. The hammer felt heavy in his hand as he stood in front of the wall. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he swung. The first udar cracked through the plaster with a dull, hollow sound. Dust exploded into the air, making Ava cough as she stepped back. Ethan hit it again, harder this time, widening the hole. Then he stopped. Flashlight, he said. Caleb rushed forward, holding it up proudly. Ethan leaned in, shining the light through the opening. And froze. Behind the wall was an emptiness. It was wood. Dark, aged, carefully fitted wood. Not structural beams. Not framing. Something crafted. Ethan's pulse quickened. Step back, he said quietly. Now more careful, he began pulling pieces of plaster away by hand instead of swinging blindly. Chunk by chunk, the hidden section revealed itself. It wasn't just a space. It was a cabinet. Built directly into the wall. Perfectly measured. Perfectly concealed. And inside, wrapped in layers of cloth, stiff with age, were objects. Ethan reached in slowly, his fingers brushing against something solid. He pulled it out, unwrapping it carefully. A glass bottle. Hand-blown. Uneven, rich in color, unlike anything mass-produced. He set it down gently. Another bundle. A ceramic pitcher, painted by hand with delicate patterns that had somehow survived decades, maybe longer. Ava's eyes widened. "Dad, is this old?" "Yeah," he whispered. "Really old." One by one, they uncovered more. Coins. Dozens of them. Heavy. Cold. Marked with dates from a time long before any of them were born. A small wooden box with a brass latch. Inside, more coins, some darker, some brighter, each one carrying a weight that felt far beyond metal. Caleb stared in awe. "Are we rich?" Ethan didn't answer. Because he didn't know. But he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't random. This wasn't forgotten junk. This was hidden. Deliberately. Carefully. Protected. Then Ava reached deeper into the cabinet and pulled out something different. A small, worn leather journal. The room went completely silent. Ethan took it from her hands, almost instinctively more careful than before. The leather was cracked with age, but intact. He opened it slowly. The pages were filled with handwriting, precise, steady, from another era entirely. At the top of the first page, a name. Samuel Whitaker. And beneath it, a date. June 1891. Ethan sat back on his heels, the weight of the moment settling over him like a storm finally arriving. This house wasn't just abandoned. It had a story. And somehow, out of everyone in the world, he was the one who had just found it. Ava whispered, "What does it say?" Ethan stared at the pages, his voice low. "I think," he said slowly, "this is just the beginning." And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, hope didn't feel like a lie anymore. It felt real. Ethan Carter didn't sleep that night. The journal rested beside him on the wooden floor, its worn leather cover catching the faint glow of his phone's flashlight. Ava and Caleb were asleep nearby, curled under blankets, their breathing steady and peaceful in a place that, just days ago, had felt completely unlivable. But Ethan, he was wide awake. Because everything had changed. He opened the journal again, slower this time, as if the pages themselves deserved respect. The handwriting was sharp and deliberate, each word carefully placed, like the man who wrote it understood the importance of being remembered. "My name is Benjamin Hale." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. Another name. Another life tied to this house. The entries unfolded like a quiet confession across time. Benjamin Hale had been a craftsman, a builder, a maker of things that lasted. He had constructed the farmhouse himself in the late 1800s, shaping every beam, every wall with his own hands. But it wasn't just a house to him. It was a legacy. He wrote about the objects hidden behind the wall, each piece chosen, each one created or collected with intention. They weren't just valuables. They were pieces of history, of skill, of identity. And then came the line that made Ethan stop breathing for a second. "I do not hide these from the world out of fear, but from those who would never understand their worth." Ethan leaned back slowly, the weight of those words settling deep inside him. Not everyone deserves to find what is valuable. That was the message. He flipped through more pages, reading faster now, drawn in. Benjamin had known his time was ending. He had no family to pass his work on to, no one he trusted to protect what he had spent a lifetime building. So he made a decision, one that felt almost impossible in its patience. He hid everything. And he waited. Not in years. But in generations. The right person will come, one entry read. Not the richest. Not the strongest. But the one who sees. Ethan closed the journal. For a long moment, he just sat there in the silence of the farmhouse, listening to the faint creaks of old wood settling around him. His entire life, he had been overlooked. Passed over. Dismissed. Not because he lacked effort, but because he never had the resources, the opportunities, the timing. But now, this house, this hidden cabinet, this journal written over a century ago. It was as if everything had been waiting for someone exactly like him. Someone who didn't walk away. Someone who stayed when things got hard. Someone who looked at a broken place and saw possibility. Ava stirred beside him. "Dad, you're still awake?" "Yeah," he said softly. She rubbed her eyes, glancing at the journal. "What does it say?" Ethan hesitated for a second, then smiled faintly. "It says, 'This house matters.'" She frowned slightly. "It doesn't look like it matters." Ethan looked around the room, the cracked walls, the worn floors, the dust still clinging to the corners. "I think," he said slowly, "we've just been looking at it the wrong way." That was the moment everything shifted. Not the discovery of the treasure. Not the possibility of money. But the understanding. This wasn't about luck. This wasn't about chance. This was about value, the kind you don't see unless you're willing to look deeper than everyone else. The next morning, Ethan walked through the house differently. He didn't see damage. He saw structure. He didn't see decay. He saw foundation. He didn't see something abandoned. He saw something unfinished. And for the first time, the question in his mind wasn't, "Can we survive here?" It was, "What can we build here?" He stepped outside, the early morning light stretching across the land, touching the broken edges of the farmhouse and turning them gold. Ava and Caleb joined him, standing quietly at his side. "So what do we do now?" Ava asked. Ethan looked at the house one more time. Then he tightened his grip slightly, as if holding on to a decision he wasn't going to let go of. "We don't leave," he said. "We build." And in that moment, the farmhouse stopped being a burden. It became a purpose. The discovery of the hidden cabinet didn't change Ethan Carter's life overnight. At least, not on the outside. The farmhouse was still cold in the mornings. The roof still leaked when it rained. The floors still creaked under every step. And his bank account still barely held enough to get through the week. But inside Ethan, something had shifted permanently. He no longer saw himself as a man trying to survive. He saw himself as someone standing on the edge of something valuable. Something real. The next morning, he packed a small box. Inside it, he placed 3 carefully wrapped items from the cabinet, a ceramic pitcher, 2 coins, and 1 of the glass bottles. He didn't take the best pieces. Just enough to ask a question he could no longer ignore. "What is this worth?" "Ava, you're in charge," he said, handing her his old phone. "Stay inside. Keep the doors locked. I won't be long." She nodded seriously. "Be careful, Dad." Caleb saluted him like it was a mission. Ethan almost smiled. The nearest town was nearly 20 miles away, a small place called Briarwood. It wasn't much, just a few shops, a diner, a gas station, but it was enough. And more importantly, it had a place called Henderson Antiques. The bell above the door rang softly as Ethan stepped inside. The shop smelled like old wood and time itself. Shelves lined the walls, filled with objects that looked forgotten but somehow important. Behind the counter stood an older man, mid-60s, thin, sharp-eyed. "Help you?" he asked. Ethan hesitated for a second. Then he placed the wrapped items on the counter. "I found these," he said simply. The man raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He unwrapped the first piece, the ceramic pitcher, and froze. Not dramatically. Just still. Completely still. That silence stretched longer than Ethan expected. Then the man reached for a magnifying glass. He examined the surface, the base, the tiny imperfections in the glaze. Then he moved to the coins. His breathing slowed. Then to the glass bottle. By the time he finished, the air in the shop felt different. "Where?" the man said quietly. "Did you get these?" Ethan held his gaze. "An old farmhouse outside Ashford County." The man leaned back slowly, studying him now instead of the objects. "What's your name?" "Ethan." The man nodded once. "I'm Leonard Hayes." Another pause. Then Leonard spoke again, his voice lower now. "You don't sell these." Ethan blinked. "What? You don't sell these?" Leonard repeated. "Not yet." Ethan frowned slightly. "I need money." "I understand that," Leonard said. "But if you sell these today, you'll get a fraction of what they're actually worth." That got Ethan's attention. "How much are we talking?" Leonard exhaled slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I'd need a full appraisal to be exact," he said. "But just from what I'm seeing here, you're not holding junk." He tapped the ceramic piece lightly. "This is mid-19th century regional pottery. Rare. Especially in this condition." He pointed to the coins. "These? Some of these could be worth thousands individually depending on the mint and year." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "And the bottle?" he asked. Leonard looked at it one more time. "Hand blown. Likely pre-industrial. Collectors love pieces like this." Silence filled the space again. Then Leonard leaned forward. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "If you have more of these, you need a specialist. Not a shop like mine. Someone who deals with serious collectors." Ethan's voice was quieter now. "And if I do?" Leonard didn't hesitate. "Then your life is about to change." Those words landed heavier than anything else that day. Ethan drove back in a daze. The road blurred past him, but his mind stayed locked on one thing. This wasn't luck. This was opportunity. When he pulled up to the farmhouse, Ava ran out to meet him. "What did they say?" Ethan stepped out slowly, looking at the house. Really looking at it. Then he looked at his kids. "We're not broke," he said. Ava blinked. "What?" He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for weeks. "We've been sitting on something valuable this whole time." Caleb's eyes lit up. "Like treasure?" Ethan nodded slightly. "Yeah," he said. "Exactly like treasure." But that night, as his kids slept, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table, the journal open in front of him. Because deep down, he knew this wasn't just about money. It was about responsibility. Someone had hidden those objects for a reason. Someone had trusted that the right person would find them. And now, that person was him. The question wasn't just how much they were worth. The question was, what was he going to do with them? And for the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't afraid of the answer. Ethan Carter thought the hardest part would be fixing the house. He was wrong. The real challenge began the moment other people found out. It started quietly. A phone call. Then another. By the third day after visiting Leonard Hayes, Ethan's phone, an old device that barely held a charge, lit up with a number he hadn't seen in years. Jason. His older brother. Ethan stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Hello?" Jason didn't waste time. "I heard you went out to that property." Of course he had. News traveled fast in families. Especially when money might be involved. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, eyes drifting toward the wall where the hidden cabinet had been. "Yeah," he said calmly. "I did." A pause. Then Jason's tone shifted, softer, but calculated. "You find anything interesting?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Because in that silence, something inside him became very clear. This wasn't curiosity. This was interest. And interest meant pressure was coming. "There were some old things," Ethan said carefully. "Still figuring it out." Another pause. Then Jason exhaled through a quiet laugh. "Look, man. Whatever's there, that's family property. You know that, right?" Ethan's grip tightened slightly around the phone. No, he said. It's not. Jason's voice hardened instantly. Don't do that, Ethan. Don't act like you're the only one who matters here. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. All the years. All the silence. All the times he showed up when no one else did. And now. Now it mattered. It was left to me, Ethan said, steady and controlled. Everything on that property. That's not how this works, Jason snapped. You think Dad just forgot to mention something like that? You think he didn't know? Ethan's eyes opened slowly. He knew, he said quietly. And for the first time. He believed it. Jason went silent on the other end. That answer hadn't been expected. Well, Jason said after a moment, voice colder now, then maybe we need to let a lawyer figure it out. The line went dead. Ethan lowered the phone slowly. There it was. The fight he never wanted. But this time, he wasn't backing down. That night, the farmhouse felt different again. Not unsafe. Not broken. But watched. Not by people, but by expectation. Ava noticed it first. Something's wrong, she said quietly as they sat around the small camp stove. Ethan looked at her. Why do you say that? She hesitated. Because you're quiet again. He smiled faintly. She wasn't wrong. Caleb looked between them. Are we in trouble? Ethan shook his head immediately. No. We're not in trouble. But the truth was. They were at a turning point. The next few decisions would define everything. The following week, Ethan drove to Nashville. Leonard had connected him with a specialist, Dr. Oliver Grant, a respected appraiser known for dealing with rare American artifacts. The meeting took place in a quiet office filled with books, glass cases, and controlled lighting. Dr. Grant was precise. Careful. The kind of man who didn't rush conclusions. He examined every piece Ethan brought. Photographed them. Measured them. Compared them against records. And for nearly 3 hours. He said almost nothing. Ethan sat across from him, hands clasped tightly, feeling the weight of every second. Finally, Dr. Grant closed his notebook. He looked up. And smiled slightly. Mr. Carter, he said, I'm going to be very direct with you. Ethan nodded. What you've found. Dr. Grant paused briefly, choosing his words, is significant. Ethan leaned forward slightly. How significant? Dr. Grant turned the notebook toward him. Numbers filled the page. Ranges. Estimates. Carefully written. Ethan read the lowest number first. Then the highest. And his breath caught. $380,000. To over $500,000. For a moment, the room felt completely silent. Like the world had stepped back just to let that number exist. Ethan looked up slowly. You're sure? Dr. Grant nodded once. With full authentication, possibly even more. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his mind struggling to process it. $500,000. From a house no one wanted. From something everyone laughed at. But then, Dr. Grant added something that changed everything again. There's one more thing. Ethan's eyes lifted. The journal, Dr. Grant said. If it's authentic, it may be the most valuable piece of all. Ethan frowned slightly. Why? Dr. Grant leaned forward. Because it connects everything, he said. Provenance. History. Story. He paused. And collectors don't just pay for objects. They pay for meaning. That night, back at the farmhouse, Ethan sat alone on the porch. The air was cold. The sky was clear. Inside, Ava and Caleb slept peacefully. But Ethan. He was no longer the same man who walked into that house. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He wasn't just rebuilding. He was protecting something valuable. Something earned. Something chosen for him. By someone who believed he was the right person. And now, with money, pressure, and family conflict closing in, Ethan Carter had to decide. Would he become the man who sold everything? Or the man who proved why he was chosen in the first place? He looked out into the darkness, jaw tightening slightly. "I'm not losing this," he whispered. Not the house. Not the future. Not the version of himself he had just begun to discover. By the time spring arrived, the farmhouse no longer looked like something the world had forgotten. It looked like something the world had been waiting for. Ethan Carter stood at the edge of the property one early morning, hands in his pockets, watching the sunlight stretch across the land. The same broken fields that once felt empty now carried something different, purpose. Behind him, the house stood stronger. Not perfect, but alive. The porch was straight again, supported by new beams he had installed with his own hands. The windows, once boarded and dark, now welcomed light into every room. The roof still had work to be done, but it no longer leaked with every storm. Piece by piece, day by day, he had brought it back. But the house wasn't the only thing that had changed. Ethan had sold part of the collection, carefully, deliberately, never rushing. With Dr. Oliver Grant guiding him, he found buyers who understood the true value of what they were purchasing. Not just objects, but history. When the final transaction cleared, the number sitting in his bank account didn't feel real. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Enough to change everything. But what surprised everyone, even himself, was what he didn't do. He didn't leave. He didn't buy a mansion. He didn't disappear into a new life. Instead, he stayed. Because somewhere along the way, this place had stopped being an opportunity. It had become home. The legal battle came. And it went. Jason and Victoria tried. Of course they did. Lawyers. Claims. Accusations. Words like unfair and entitled thrown around like they meant something. But the truth held. The will was clear. The property, everything in it, belonged to Ethan. And when the judge made the final decision, it wasn't dramatic. It was simple. Final. Unshakable. Ethan didn't celebrate. He didn't need to. Because he had already won something far more important. One evening, months later, the farmhouse was filled with people. Not strangers. Not investors. But neighbors. Friends. The kind of people who had stopped by out of curiosity. And stayed because they saw something worth believing in. A long wooden table sat in the yard, lit by strings of soft lights hanging between trees. Laughter echoed through the air, carried by a warm breeze that smelled like fresh earth and spring grass. Ava moved between guests, confident now, smiling in a way she hadn't in months. Caleb ran through the yard, chasing fireflies with a kind of freedom only children truly understand. And Ethan? He stood quietly for a moment, watching it all. Taking it in. Because this was the real outcome. Not the money. Not the victory. But this feeling. Of building something that mattered. Later that night, after everyone had gone, Ethan climbed onto the small wooden platform he had built behind the house. It wasn't fancy. Just a simple deck overlooking the fields. But it was enough. He leaned against the railing, looking out into the darkness. The creek whispered somewhere beyond the trees. The house stood behind him, solid, steady, real. Inside, his children slept safely. For the first time in a long time. Everything was quiet. His phone buzzed. A message. From Jason. Ethan hesitated before opening it. I heard what you did with the place. It looks good. I'm glad. No apology. Not really. But something close enough to it. Ethan read it once. Then locked his phone and set it down. Some things didn't need answers right away. Some things just needed time. He looked back out at the land, breathing in the cool night air. And for a moment, his mind drifted back. To that day in the lawyer's office. The laughter. The pity. The rusted key in his hand. Everyone thought he had been given nothing. But they were wrong. He had been given a chance. A test. A door that no one else had the patience. Or the courage. To open. And he had walked through it. Not because it was easy. But because he refused to walk away. Inside the house, near the fireplace, the wall looked like any other. Clean. Restored. Whole. But Ethan knew the truth. He knew what had been hidden there. He knew what it had revealed. Not just about the past. But about him. Because the greatest thing he had uncovered in that house wasn't the treasure. It was himself. Ethan Carter closed his eyes for a moment, letting that truth settle deep. Then he opened them again, steady and certain. This was his life now. Not something given. Not something lucky. Something built. Earned. Protected. And finally, understood. Ethan Carter's journey is not just about a hidden treasure, it's about vision, resilience, and character. Most people walked away from that farmhouse because they only saw what was on the surface: decay, damage, and disappointment. Even his own family dismissed it without a second thought. But Ethan did something different. He looked closer. He stayed when it was uncomfortable. He worked when there was no guarantee of success. And most importantly, he believed that something broken could still hold value. That's the lesson. Ethan wasn't chosen by chance. He was chosen because of who he was, someone who didn't quit, didn't overlook, and didn't take the easy way out. Think about your own life for a moment. What is something you've been avoiding because it looks too difficult? A job opportunity? A relationship? A personal goal? Now ask yourself, are you seeing it clearly, or just seeing the surface? Just like Ethan Carter, you may already be standing in front of something valuable. But you haven't looked close enough yet. Start small. Take one step forward. Put in effort where others wouldn't. Because success doesn't always come from finding something new, it often comes from recognizing the value in what you already have. And when you do, everything can change. If this story moved you, like and subscribe for more powerful stories.